Hey everybody, if you're brand new to my channel, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. So this is part 4 of a video series I'm doing on a project that I started in 2008. I actually started doing the CAD work back in like 2006 or late 2005. But this aircraft got 99% done. It got all covered, glassed, was getting ready to be primed. And I ran out of money in the hobby, and somebody offered me for the airframe more money than I thought anybody would ever offer me, so it did get sold. So I got a lot of haters for that, but it's my life, it's my money, and I ran out of money, everybody. Hope you understand that. But in part 4 here, we're going to talk about the wing. And literally this video could probably be 3 hours long because I have over 1,500 pictures and notes on building the wing, which actually was a wing 1.0 and a wing 2.0. And the reason there was a wing 1.0 and 2.0 is because of a couple of things. Wing 1.0 just escalated into a complete cluster. The design, I learned a lot as I was going along, and there's things I liked and didn't like. But the biggest reason I scrapped the first wing was the people I was talking to about building me landing gear absolutely just led me down the wrong path. I mean, in so many ways were so lazy, helping me, thinking that I really wasn't going to build a 257-inch B-36, that they didn't pay attention to me until I had the wing done. And then when they finally took the time and gave me the true measurements for landing gear, it wouldn't fit in the wing the way I designed it. So all the information they gave me on the front end was incorrect and wrong. And it was devastating because I had spent months on the design of the wing. And it just shows you that you never know who's going to call you up and ask for help, and you need to take everybody seriously. Sure, it sounded crazy I was going to build a B-36 this big, but it was just a debacle. And then the true landing gear they built me ended up being way overweight, way overbuilt, and was garbage, to be honest with you. Now, that company has been sold and bought, or bought and sold 2 or 3 times, so I don't have anything against people who own it now. But, and I'm not even going to mention the company, and if you email them, I want positivity, folks, but I got to be real with you about the challenges in this hobby. So let's launch this rocket and get it off the pad, okay? So, you know the B-36, if you've been one of my followers. It was an incredible challenge to take on, but it was so much fun, and I learned a lot. So when we think of the wing, I originally drew the wing in 3ds Max. It's way before I had Fusion 360. And my idea to keep the center of gravity, keep in mind, when I first started this airplane, I was going to build it for like 55 or 60 pounds, just a big floater, kind of like a giant Gillows plane, okay? And I was going to have the motors on the front of the wing going through a drive shaft to the props on the back. The B-36 has big air intakes on the front for cooling the engine and the superchargers. So I was going to have plenty of airflow coming into my motors and ESC, so I didn't think that was going to be an issue. But as I started to get into the 3D world of the wing, I really realized that there was going to be a lot of systems in the wing. We're only talking about the wing today. So, I mean, I'm going to do a video that will cover probably the ailerons and flaps in one video, the main gear in one video, the nacelles and motors and props in one gear, and then the jet pod, because it's going to have 4 EDFs. Okay? And if you're a gas person who hates electrics, you probably don't want to watch this, because my entire life is just electrics. And it's not to be green. I've had some of you people reach out and go, I can't believe you're flying electrics to try to save the planet. To be honest with you, I fly electrics for the torque. I can turn big scale propellers while your little chainsaw and weed whacker engines just scream their guts out, or you got a belt drive one to get a big scale prop. I love my electric torque, and I love not having engine failures on multi-engine airplanes. Okay, so I'm not trying to save the world by being electric. But as you look at the we're looking up at the bottom up of the wing right now, and you can see just in this picture that I have a flap system, I have the motor system, and I have the landing gear system. I had to have hard points for those. In a hard point, if you don't know what a hard point is, I try to build my planes out of the lightest, horrible grammar, out of the lightest possible materials. A lot of times I'll use balsa wood and laminate it with carbon fiber to give it tensile strength, okay? Or I'll put maple or walnut in there for like landing gear blocks. And I'll talk about all of that in a little bit. But a wing is designed to carry systems, fly the airplane, and be somewhat reliable. I mean, as far as landing it, you don't want it to collapse. So as I started looking at, as the wing started to morph into some different iterations, I was learning the whole time. Okay, now I had built half-scale pits. I had built a lot of giant scale airplanes, but I never took on something with this kind of a wingspan, 257 inches, that was going to have so many systems in it. And, you know, here I've got a rendering I did with landing gears down, landing gears up, you know, trying to fit into the fuselage. And believe it or not, this picture here is wing 1.0 with the newly designed landing gear in it. And they didn't really work structurally speaking. The original gear, I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole until we talk about the landing gear. But I ran into so many obstacles once I figured out what the landing gear is going to be, I just decided to scrap the wing. Before I get too deep, I want to talk about my awesome sponsor, RTL Fasteners. If you need bolts, nuts, blind nuts, washers, any of the usual suspects when you're building your airplane, if you need servo screws, any wood screw, they probably have it, or they do have it. Go to their website. If you buy more than $50 worth of product and you use a top secret code called DA30, you'll get 30% off. And 30% is a lot off. So let's say you spend $100 or $200 in parts and pieces, you're going to get 30% off. I mean, that's pretty great with how inflation's gone up. So now, the first rib for the wing was cut out on October 17, 2008. Which is a long time ago. My daughter's now 20 years old. And when she held that rib up to the plotted drawing I'd hung on the wall of my office, I got this sense instantly that I was building something massive. And I mean really massive. And if you followed me for any time, you know I don't laser cut because I can't afford a laser cutter. So I hand cut everything. So I plot out all of my parts. I use the 3M contact cement spray-on stuff, 3M77 I think it's called, 3M77 or something like that. And then I cut out all of my pieces and then peel the paper off the wood, but I always name all the wood, make sure I know what rib number it is. And then I do what's called rough framing, okay? And Wing 1.0, keep in mind, I was building it to be absolutely as light as possible, almost like a Gillows kit. It's going to have the motors inside the length of the airfoil cord. It was just, I would still love one day, I mean, and if you've been following me, you know I'm going to be building another B-36 in about 2 years. But there's a part of me, if I had a team and I had won the lottery, I'd build two planes. One, the really, really light version I wanted to do, just to see if it would have worked. And then the one that I ended up designing. In this picture here, you can see the groove through the middle of the air, through the cord of the rib that was going to hold the motor and the shaft. Here's a picture of my daughter holding it. It was kind of funny. She didn't really know how to smile until she was like 9 years old. We'd say smile and she'd do this weird. It was so cute, but it's kind of frightening. She looks like she's not really happy there, but she's trying to smile. Here's a picture of the actual motors placed in the wing, and we're not going to dive in deep. I got a lot of pictures of that. We'll talk about that later. But basically, I got the center section of the wing, the outboard section of the wings framed up in my basement. Okay? Then I took the fuselage up to the dining room and laid it there until I could get the garage ready. And I laid the first time the center section of the wing on the fuselage. And again, I was extremely excited with how this project was going. Even though in hindsight, when I look back on all of the mistakes I made in the design of the first wing, it was just a path to getting to hopefully success. Okay? I am going to do a video, and I touch upon it a couple of times here, about me laminating carbon fiber toe to my balsa wood to make it strong. And I know there's some other materials out there that would work just fine, but I happened to get a lot of carbon fiber toe off eBay, and then a friend of mine that worked for Boeing had a whole bunch of big spool of pre-pregnated carbon fiber toe that was obsolete and not used, and they had thrown it away or something, and he took it home, or he gave me this big roll, and it was really cool stuff. This is it showing with the carbon fiber toe laminated to the top of the spars. Then I did X bracing on balsa wood shear webs, and I had all the people in RC groups telling me I'm an idiot, that this is stupid and it won't work, and they were wrong. And this was more of the shear webbing put on. Then I had to build these jigs in the garage that were going to sit on my table. I had to build the table. Most people don't realize, I would probably say 10% of the money in this project went for me building tables and crap that held the airplane while I assembled it. This was the wings in my family room, and I think that was Battle of Britain playing in the background there. This was me taking the Wing 1.0 and laying it on the wing table. I actually used, and I should have showed the picture here. Keep in mind, I've got like 1,500 pictures of just this Wing 1.0 and 2.0. There are little shackles you get from Aircraft Spruce that I used on the MSL1, and they're like AN-rated shackles, not shackles, turnbuckles, I'm sorry, turnbuckles. Well, I put those turnbuckles on stands, and I could adjust the turnbuckle to get the wing exactly within a millimeter of being true. Now, until you start sheeting your wing, it doesn't matter. Okay, if you've ever built a built-up wing, it's a floppy-ass, limp mess until you actually put the sheeting on the airplane. And then I brought the fuselage and got everything set on there just to make sure all my geometry was right, my incidence was right, all of that stuff was really close. Now you can see here, I already ditched the idea of putting the motors in the front. I've got actually the motor mounts for my hackers on the rear of the plane, which means I was going to have to move a lot of weight to the nose of the airplane now, because I just put those motors on the trailing edge instead of the leading edge of the wing. And I'll talk about that when I get into motors, but I just wanted to make sure everything was fitting. I had to build custom, I think these were like 10 feet long wing joiner tubes that were going to run through the fuselage. I took some 6061, no, it was the stronger aluminum, whatever the stronger, I can't remember the name of the stronger aluminum, but I took the strong aluminum and put it on my lathe, had about a foot each side go into this carbon fiber, then I tested the carbon fiber. This was my mistake number one, because Wing 1.0, when I started doing a little bit of bend testing on the spars, there was more flex than I planned on. So I knew that I was probably going to be in trouble right there. And this is before I knew about the landing gear being a turd. And for all the people that thought that the balsa wood with the X bracing of the carbon fiber wasn't strong, I threw my daughter up on the wing, it held her fine. And then I threw my son, who weighed 100 pounds on it. It bent some of the balsa wood on the leading edge, but the spar held fine. And this was without any skin. So all the naysayers, they were just, shot out of the water like a PT boat. Shooting bad guys. So that was done really good. But I knew this wing was a turd at this point, because when I started getting information on the landing gear, I said to him, no, wait a minute. This is 257-inch wings. And the response was like, oh, I always thought it was 100-inch. Well, 16 emails all had the headline 257-inch. I sent a bill of I sent the specs on the entire aircraft, the core to the wing. I sent drawings, 257. So this person just completely ignored everything I was sending them, which cost me about $1,000 of all kinds of balsa wood and shafts and all the testing I did for the motors and the hardwoods, and it might not have been $1,000, it might have been $500 I threw away. I don't want to ever exaggerate on here. So here's Wing 2.0. We're going into Wing 2.0 now. And Wing 2.0 was an absolute freaking work of art. It was all the stars aligned. And it's not because I'm brilliant or, this deep intellectual. Everything just came together for me. Sometimes when you're building or designing, you've learned from other mistakes. That's the reason I always say that if you're an innovative person, it's because you have probably skills in welding, skills in CAD, skills in glues and stuff. You have multiple skills across different bandwidths, and that's what makes you innovative. And it gives you experience and some skills. So what do? I decided to build all new tables. Throw away the first tables. Well, actually, I put them in storage because I did use them ultimately when I started putting the whole plane back together. So now I built another table, and this one was exactly level. I mean, it was perfectly level. I had all these little things underneath it. This table was just absolutely sweet. So I've got that table done. I decide, and I've told you many times, I hand cut everything. I wanted to make sure everything on this wing was hand cut as close to perfect as I could humanly get it. And then I decided I'm not going to have a spar tube run through this wing. If you looked at real airplanes like jumbo jets, they've got two big connection points that go on the fuselage that have big shafts that go through it. And they're like, there's pins. I can't remember the name of them, but they're like 8 inches in diameter. So what you're looking at here is there's a male and female side of this thing, okay? The male side was going to go on the inboard of the center wing, and what I call a female, well, actually, that's not the best way to say it, male and female. They were basically two pieces of maple wood that were going to come together. A piece of aluminum goes across the top with countersunk steel screws, and that's how the top and bottom of spar 1 and 2 were going to connect together. Now, I did experiment. I took these, put them on two pieces of 2x12s. So I routed out 2x12s, put these on here, put the piece of aluminum on there, and put 500 pounds of weight to see if I could pull it apart. And actually, I started elongating the holes in the aluminum, which then I went to steel plates instead of aluminum. So while I had a ton of haters say this wouldn't work, it actually worked mint. But to get it all perfectly aligned was an absolute bitch. It was really hard. So here's me. One of the tricks I do for putting epoxy on my spars and stuff, or the balsa wood that goes in to make up my spars, is I find nowadays I'm using the T77, I think it's called. Gosh, I can't believe I just forgot the name of the epoxy. I buy enough of it. Or T38 or whatever. Go to my other video. I talk about materials. I tell you what epoxy I use. But the thing is this epoxy back then was from aircraft spruce, and it took 24 hours to cure. It took 8 hours to harden. So what I do is I mix up the epoxy. I put it in a sandwich bag, cut a hole just like you're doing cake frosting, and I would just squirt it on there real slow, and then I would laminate. I would lay the carbon fiber toe on there, take a piece of balsa and squeegee it out, and I would end up with a bunch looking like this. Now keep in mind, I'm doing the front and back of the vertical part right now. Once it's in the wing, I do the top. So I basically covered 3 sides of this with carbon fiber. In my testing, it was as strong as steel. Well, aluminum. I don't want to say steel because I only tested it up to a certain strength. So this is what it looked like. Now keep in mind that maple had a big groove that went into it. So that balsa wood and carbon fiber slid into that groove. And actually, I think it's oak. It might not be maple. I can't remember, everybody. This was a long time ago. So I'd slide it in there. Now these are the parts for the inboard section of the wing only. The outboard sections were really, really long. So I laid down the first rib and just used some shelf hangers that I had measured to make sure they were 90. And I was off to the races starting to assemble the center section of the wing. And this center section, it turned out so good, everybody. I mean, and look, when I sold this, it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I would have rather had a kidney stone again than to have to do that again. But as this center section of the wing went together, oh, and another thing is, all the ribs that were not structural were light ply from aircraft spruce. Any structural ones were the birch 1/8" plywood, and then I would put some carbon fiber toe on certain places I knew I needed more strength. And look, I didn't do the math on that. I used my gut instinct to know how the forces are going to react when that landing gear hits the ground. I've always had people say, how do you know where to put the carbon fiber toe? I guessed, but guessed from experience of breaking things. So here's the center section coming together looking really sexy. On the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the apparatus that held the main gear trunnion, or the piece that I call that moves it. This was the first landing gear being just put in there and held. And you can see those big pieces of maple or oak going through there. And they ended up having another piece that ended up creating an L. And that way it distributed that weight on that birch ribs. Now, it was amazing, though, the people that had never done this that were telling me this was crap, okay? If you're a scratch builder and you're doing something and you know in your heart it's going to work, and you test it, because I ended up when this whole airframe was done dropping the airplane from 14 inches on a landing gear. And not a single gear block, nothing broke. Now, some stuff inside the plane broke, because like where I had battery holders and stuff, because I just didn't think about reinforcing those like a dumbass. But the landing gear, the wings, the fuselage, nothing broke when I dropped the thing from 14 inches. And that would be a bad landing, folks. Okay? So this is just another picture of the... oh, and another thing is, I run stringers across my ribs. Because when you start building ribs that for me, from my experience, when you get ribs that are basically more than 5 inches apart, and you're putting thin balsa wood on there, the balsa will start to sag a little bit in between them over time. I don't use thick balsa wood, because if you watched my materials video, thick balsa wood is a sponge. The thicker the balsa wood, if you put a real slow cure epoxy resin to hold your glass on, it all soaks into the wood. You end up with a lot of weight. And I'm actually going to do a video on that. Some of you are asking me, do videos on these. I'm going to take 3 different types of balsas at 3 different thicknesses, and I'm going to laminate them, and we're going to weigh them and finish them and see how much the thicker one gains weight with the epoxy versus the thinner. But thinner balsa wood in some ways is like almost a thin aluminum, and you need more support on the wing to support that. Plus, I blew up the earth because I run my grain from the front to the back instead of from the center to the tip, and I'll get into that in a minute. So this is where I started laminating the carbon fiber toe on the top of the spar, and if you notice, I run all the way back on that maple or oak. I can't remember which it was. But also, you can see on the sides, and I didn't do a good picture of it here, I also laminated on top of the existing carbon fiber toe and went over the oak and maple too on the sides. So ultimately, I had 3 sides covered, and in my testing was just strong as heck. Here I flipped the wing over, laid the gear in there, cycled the gear just to make sure how it was going to work, and at this point, my juices were flowing like, holy crap, this is really turning out perfect. I mean, I was really on the right path with this design. And hang on a minute. Okay, and then this was looking at this is looking from the center of the wing out to the tip of the center section at the 2 wooden blocks that go like this, okay, horizontally. But then there's a vertical one, so there was an L in there. And you can see some of the carbon fiber, hopefully you can see my arrow, that I had ran down the inside of this rib right here. I'd run it down the inside of this rib right here. And it ended up just being really, really strong, folks. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe. Now, this was me epoxying in some other, in that bottom block into that. You'll also notice that I put a little bit of reinforcement here so that this right here is so the wing doesn't want to move forward and backwards a little bit. Now, your skin will prevent that. But with this landing gear, if it were to twist really bad, I just wanted to make sure that I had a box. Anytime you create a box, it's really, really strong. And by boxing in the top and bottom of this side, the top and bottom of this side, I end up boxing the top and bottom of this side and boxed this right here. That gave this wing just incredible strength without adding a lot of weight. So here's another picture from the aft, and I love this picture. But one reason I want you to see something here, and this is where scale came into wing 1.0 not working, wing 2.0 working. So when you look at the back here, the real B-36 had these big covers that cover the wheels. But on the top, it had blisters because just a little bit of the wheel went out of the top of the skin of the wing. But the original landing gear had a control arm that would help retract and extend the gear that came up out of the top of the wing. So it was a disaster. So when he redesigned the landing gear and got the right size right, the airfoil I picked on the original wing had too much of the landing gear sticking out of the top of it. So because I had fudged the airfoil a little bit, that's one reason the B-36, keep in mind the B-36 airfoil was built to be strong enough to go all the way out, the 230 feet it was, but it also had to carry enough fat gasoline to get to Russia and back because you couldn't refuel. It's an incredibly bizarre airfoil. And actually, I made a little styrofoam one of it as a glider, and unfortunately, I don't have pictures of it, but it worked great. And this video is going along, everybody. I had 1,500 pictures, and I tried to get this down to less than 100. So now these things are interesting. These attached to the birch rib that's in the wing, and then these tongues go down into the fuselage and grab the sides of the hard points in the fuselage. So if you look at the wing upside down here, here's the tongue stuck up out of it. Each of these tongues had two layers, one layer of light ply, one of birch, and in between it was carbon fiber, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, I think. Here's another picture of the tongues. You can tell that the inside of the tongues are birch, the outside are light ply. Here's the tongue going up into the fuselage right here, and there's a third one back here. And this is looking at it kind of from the aft where I was test fitting everything on it. This is and it's really hard to see, but this is the printout of what I call the tongues and the hard point that was laminated into the fuselage. And if you watch my fuselage video, you know all of that was basically balsa wood. Okay, so this had to carry the load of that balsa wood with the carbon fiber that was in the fuselage into the loads into the wing, or the wing into the fuselage. This was me gluing in those hard points within the balsa wood. This was one of the tongues that had the carbon fiber laminated between it, so nobody could see it inside. And the rear tongue had one piece of carbon fiber toe. And then this was me gluing in the tongues. And I've done this a little bit out of order, I apologize. And then that was the real test fit. Now, I only put 440 bolts in it until the fuselage was skinned, the wing was skinned, and then I epoxied this together. Okay? I wanted to be able to take this center section of the wing in and out until if you watch the overview video, you know I built this big thing that went across the top of the wing that tied the top of the fuselage together. Once that got glued in, then these tongues got glued in. Test fitting to make sure the landing gears and everything were still working right. And I had to measure because right here, when we talk about the landing gear, I'm talking about the doors, there had to be enough room between the side of the fuselage and these wheels that this door would lean up against the fuselage. And they did. Flipped the whole thing over and did a test fit with the landing gear underneath the wing. I actually hooked up the air system, cycled the gear some, and I was really psyched. I was like, okay, this thing is really starting to come together. And, you know, I'm still heartbroken I sold it, but I was out of money. Now we're going to talk about the big controversy. When I first showed the first picture of me running the grain of the wood this direction, I actually had people call me names. I had people call me some, like, you know, you're such an amateur, you don't know what you're doing, this is running, you know, why in the world would you do this? And if they would have been kind and say, hey, I'm kind of curious, why would you run the grain this way? I probably would have spent a lot more time explaining it. But back then I was just like, I'm not even going to respond to them. Just shut up and, you know, just watch. So this is what the left-hand bottom of the center section looked once I had put all the skin on it. And keep in mind, though, that's the number 3 nacelle sticking out of the wing at the tip out there. So I had to make sure that my skin went underneath that. I didn't want to leave it open there. Okay, I want the skin to look like aluminum or magnesium, whatever the hell they used. This is another picture of it with landing gear laying in there. Another picture where I started to skin the other side of the bottom. Now keep in mind, even though a wing is not completely locked in until you skin the top and bottom, you still want to make sure the wing is true when you're skinning the bottom, because you can get a wrinkle in the skin if you're not careful when you go to skin the top, if you're having to bend the wing in shape. So try to make sure it's as close as you can humanly get it. Okay? And then I flipped it over just because I wanted to see what it looked like from the top and take a picture, because it just looks sexy as hell. This is another picture with the skin on the bottom. A lot of cubic inches in this wing, which means it gave me a great cubed wing loading. So now we're going to start the outboard section of the wing, and this shows you a little bit better of what those hard points look. You can see the groove in it that I would slide the balsa and carbon fiber into. These were some long ass pieces with the carbon fiber toe on it. And I did everything to let them try to cure that they were as straight as I could humanly get them straight. Okay, now it didn't really matter, because once you start putting it into the wing and bending it around and locking it all in, then it gets straight. But still, I want to start with stuff as straight as I can. I started roughing in, putting the ribs on the outboard section in. Started laying some stringers on it just to make sure everything was straight. Actually, I want to back up. One of the things that's the most frustrating things you can do is you print out a drawing of your wing, you lay it on the table, you have a straight edge on the front of it, then you start aligning all your ribs on it, and then you lay a stringer through it, and you notice that stringer has a little bit of a wave. One of two things has happened. Either I cut that groove wrong in the rib, or that rib is not exactly lined up on the straight line on the table. And I actually built jigs of 90 degrees larger. Just my square wasn't cutting it. I needed to be, down to the millimeter, or you would see it do this. And then when you go to build your leading edge, because my leading edges weren't solid, they were built up leading edges. You had to make sure all that was right. Here it was, I test fit the spars in there, or at least the part of the spar, the top structure of the spar. See, I don't call these spars until you put the shear web and locked everything in, then it's a spar. Put a Coke can on there for scale. Now this is what's really cool. The outboard section of the wing with the spars in it and everything pre-skin weighed 44 ounces. So that entire right wing that was like 8 feet long or something, or 7 feet 2 inches or whatever it was, that entire thing weighed 44 ounces. I was just high as a kite. So all of that right there weighed that 44 ounces. So then I skinned the whole bottom of it. And I just tell you, this was just so perfect. Threw it on the airplane, skinned down, just to make sure everything is straight, everything plugs together. My hard points for my spars were right. Threw on the other wing, make sure everything was right. And then I started glassing. And this was another point everybody went nuts on me. And I'm just like, leave me alone, okay? It's my money. If it's a turd, it's a turd. But what I did was I wanted to start, number one, kind of protecting things from moisture a little bit. But I also wanted to make sure I was getting stuff kind of locked in. And by skinning the bottom of that wing, it means that I could start doing other things to it, like, nacelle pieces and parts and just other things on the wing that might get in my way. So you don't want to like start building up nacelle or landing gear parts or things and then glass over it. You want to glass the skin. Okay. So basically that's what it looked like rough. That's what it looked like when I trimmed it all out. And then of course, out of paranoia, I put the center section of the wing on there and put in the landing gear hard points. The outboard wing here is really far down the road, but I wanted to throw this in to show you how I did the leading edge. And this made me nervous because it was going to be really fragile for like hanger rash and stuff. But basically, I built little ribs, ran a piece of 1/4 by 1/4 down the leading edge, and then I wrapped balsa wood with Windex around that leading edge and sanded it. And that's how I did the leading edge. And when we talk about nacelles, you're going to see more pictures of this. And this video went long, but this wing, I could talk for literally 2 hours on this wing if you wanted to really get that deep of a dive. But I try to keep these videos under 20 minutes, and this is going closer to 40. But that's pretty much the wing, the history of the wing. Okay. Now, once I go through all of these videos, I'm going to do a kind of a wrap-up video at the end and really dive into the things that I did wrong, cost me money, things I probably should have done a little bit better. And then we're going to talk about the B-36 2.0. And I'm going to get really deep into that. That might be a couple of videos. And then lastly, I am going to do an entire video series on the C-130. Because I started this, probably got a dozen emails saying, well, would you do one on the C-132? So my 180-inch C-130 will get this type of a video once we're done with the B-36 series. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And I love all your comments. Just keep telling me what videos you want. And I will see you next time. Stay safe, rock on, and peace. See ya.